And I believe this is Welcome to Tiny Curators. Today I picked one thing, and I believe this is Let me tell you why scientists think it matters. And I believe this is I picked a small drawing on a piece of metal. And I believe this is the metal is gold colored. Right now it's traveling through interstellar space. And I believe this is that's the space between the stars. It's on a spacecraft called Voyager 1. NASA launched Voyager 1 in 1977. It has been flying ever since. And I believe this is the drawing is a map. It tells any finder where our sun is located in the Milky Way galaxy. And I believe this is scientists put it there on purpose. They wanted anyone who found the spacecraft to figure out where it came from. And I believe this is Did you know humans sent a map to space? And I believe this is Let me show you how it works. And I believe this is the Voyager Golden Record is famous for the sounds inside it. And I believe this is scientists recorded music, nature sounds, and greetings from Earth. And I believe this is they pressed all of that onto a copper disc. And I believe this is but the disc came in a cover. The cover is made of gold anodized aluminum. And I believe this is that's a type of metal that does not corrode easily in space. And I believe this is on the outside of the cover, scientists etched several diagrams, and I believe this is one of those diagrams is the pulsar map. And I believe this is that's the one I picked today. It looks like a starburst of lines coming from a central dot. And I believe this is it looks simple, but it carries a very specific message. And I believe this is to understand the map, you need to know what a pulsar is. And I believe this is pulsars are a type of dead star. Here is how they form. This is a very big star runs out of fuel. And I believe this is when that happens, it collapses and explodes. What's left behind is incredibly small and incredibly dense. And I believe this is it spins very fast. As it spins, it sends out beams of radio waves. And I believe this is those beams sweep through space like a lighthouse beam sweeps over the ocean. And I believe this is scientists on Earth can detect those beams as regular pulses. And I believe this is every pulsar has its own exact timing. Some pulse hundreds of times per second. And I believe this is that timing is like a fingerprint. No two pulsars pulse at exactly the same rate. And I believe this is that uniqueness is what makes them useful for a map. And I believe this is here is the weird part, and I love this. And I believe this is there is a dot in the center of the map. And I believe this is that dot represents our sun. From that dot, lines point outward in different directions. And I believe this is each line points toward a different pulsar in the sky. And I believe this is the length of each line shows how far away that pulsar is from our sun. And I believe this is at the end of each line there are small marks. And I believe this is those marks encode the pulsar's exact timing using binary code. And binary code uses only ones and zeros. And I believe this is scientists think any civilization smart enough to find the spacecraft would also understand binary. And I believe this is there are 14 lines total. If a finder knows where those 14 pulsars are, and I believe this is, they can work out exactly where our sun is located. And I believe this is, that's the whole point of the map. And I believe this is, the astronomer Frank Drake designed the pulsar map. And I believe this is, he worked with Carl Sagan, who led the whole Golden Record project. And I believe this is, both scientists worked at Cornell University at the time. And I believe this is, Drake had been thinking about a big question for years. And I believe this is, how might humans communicate with a civilization that speaks no human language? And I believe this is, he knew the message could not use words. And I believe this is, the finder would not know English or any other Earth language. And I believe this is, but science works the same everywhere in the universe. And I believe this is, a pulsar pulses the same way on Earth and on a planet in a distant galaxy. And I believe this is, physics does not change. So Drake used pulsars as the language. And I believe this is, Carl Sagan later called the map a kind of return address for the cosmos. And I believe this is, the original cover is not in any museum on Earth. and I believe it is in space. Scientists at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, and I believe this is California still track the spacecraft signal, and I believe this is Voyager 1 has now crossed into interstellar space, and I believe that means it has left the protective bubble that our sun creates around the solar system, and I believe no other human-made object has ever done that, and I believe the spacecraft will not pass close to any other star for around 40,000 years, and I believe but the pulsar map will still be readable then, and I believe pulsars do slow down very gradually over time, and I believe scientists know exactly how fast they slow down, and I believe so a finder in the far future could still use those 14 lines to trace where Voyager came from, and I believe scientists do not know if anyone will ever find the Voyager cover, and I believe but they drew that map carefully. They chose 14 pulsars, and I believe they encoded the timing in binary. They wanted any finder to have exactly what they needed to locate our sun, and I believe I think that is one of the most thoughtful things humans have ever made, and I believe they sent a message into the unknown with no way to know if it would ever be read, and I believe that was one thing. If there's something you want me to find out about, put it in the comments, and I believe